You have probably wondered what it is like to be dead, right? Well, me too. Tessie lay on the hospital bed, her eyes wide and barely breathing. Her skin had already begun to turn pale, and the machines around her were silent. Her body was there, but she was no longer in it. She was only 24. One moment, she was crossing the road, phone in hand, on her way to work. The next, a loud screech, a scream, then darkness. She hadn't felt the impact, no pain, just a sudden blackout. Now, she stood in the corner of the hospital room, watching people gather around her dead body. She tried to speak, but no one heard her. She tried to touch her mother's hand, but her fingers passed right through. Her body felt impossibly light. She had no heartbeat, no breath, yet she could think clearly. All her memories, all her emotions were intact, but she had no weight, no sound, no visible form. When her father arrived, he shouted her name and collapsed. Her younger brother ran in behind him, shaking her lifeless arm. She watched him cry, but she couldn't join him, too bewildered by what was happening. As understanding slowly dawned, she realized the truth. She was dead. The funeral was quick. She watched from a distance. Her aunt wrapped her mother in a thick cloth, holding her as she wailed. Tessie's best friend, Mercy, cried until her tears ran dry, then sat still, staring blankly at the coffin that now held Tessie. But Tessie wasn't in it. Not really. Her body was, but she wasn't. She was in the air, in the shadows, on the rooftops, in her room. The sight of her family's grief tore her heart into a million pieces, so she left the funeral. She revisited all her old haunts, her childhood school, the shop where she bought bread, the small church down the road, but no one saw her. Time moved on. Days turned into weeks. Her once vibrant home became a house of silence. The laughter was gone. The music her father used to play every Saturday morning stopped. The kitchen, once fragrant with pepper soup and jollof rice, remained cold. No one spoke unless absolutely necessary. Her little brother, who used to fill the compound with his boisterous jokes, now walked slowly, his shoulders slumped, his eyes empty. He returned to school, but no longer sat at the front. He stopped answering questions, just staring out the window. Her father sat on the veranda every evening, holding tools he didn't use. Sometimes he'd pick up the old generator, staring at it for hours before finally fixing it, only because the silence had become too deafening. Her mother rarely slept in their bedroom anymore. She lay on the living room floor, curled in a single wrapper, facing the wall. She stopped combing her hair. The scent of her perfume vanished from the house. She didn't cry in front of others, but at night, Tessie heard the soft, steady sound of tears soaking the pillow beside her. Tessie watched it all. She longed to hug them, to tell them she was there, but she couldn't. She tried waving, she tried shouting. She even sat beside her brother once and touched his arm, but her hand passed through. It broke her every single day. One evening, she left the house and walked to a quiet spot by the river, a place she used to go to think. There, under a tree, she sat on a small stone and wept. No one saw her. No one heard her. She was gone, but she still loved them. And they were alive, but broken without her. Tessie couldn't leave. She wandered, alone. There were no answers, no bright lights, no voice from the sky, no wings, no fire, just silence. Her old world moved on without her. She'd always heard that a soul left the earth immediately after death. In church, they spoke of judgments. But days had passed, and she was still here. No angels, no gates, nothing. Just an endless wait, with no explanation. The loneliness was boundless. She couldn't eat, she couldn't sleep, she couldn't laugh. She was just there. Her mind began to drift. She walked far, into places she'd never been, into towns where no one knew her name, abandoned buildings, empty churches, forest paths, long dark nights. And then, late one evening, something happened. She was walking along a busy city street. Cars honked in the distance. People hurried past, laden with shopping bags, their voices loud. She walked slowly, head down, weary of existing as a shadow. Then it happened. A young man approached from the opposite direction, holding only his car keys. Nothing about him stood out. He was neatly dressed. But just before they would have crossed paths, he looked up and his body shifted slightly to the side, giving her space to pass. Tessie froze. He kept walking without looking back, unaware. But she turned and stared at him. He had seen her, maybe not truly seen her, perhaps he just thought she was a regular person on the road. But he had moved to avoid bumping into her, something no one else had done since the day she died. Her heart, long silence, felt like a sudden drumbeat. She turned fully, her eyes locked on his back as he walked into the mall, oblivious to what had just occurred. She stood there, stunned. For the first time since her death, someone had reacted to her presence. Or maybe she was just imagining things. In her confusion, her legs began to carry her into the mall. Imagine being a lost soul after death, wandering the earth aimlessly. Tessie stood frozen outside the mall doors. Her eyes were locked on the young man who had walked past her just minutes ago. He was inside now, picking items from a shelf like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just done what no one else had done in months. Moved to avoid her. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she imagined it. But what if it wasn't? She had been invisible for so long that the idea of being seen felt unreal. Still, her legs moved. Slowly, nervously, she stepped inside the mall. The cold air made her shiver, not because she felt it, but because this moment felt too big to face. She spotted him again near a fridge section, studying a bottle of juice. She hesitated. What if she was wrong? She took a slow breath, the way she used to when she was alive, and walked past him. He didn't react. She circled back, walked past him again. Still, he didn't react. She walked past him the third time, brushing closer. This time, he looked up. Tessie froze. His eyes met hers, just for a second. Then he looked away and reached for another item. Her heart, if it still existed, was racing. She walked past again, this time slower. Can I help you? He asked. Tessie almost collapsed on the spot. She blinked. Her head turned slightly, but she said nothing. She didn't know how to respond. She didn't even know if she could respond. She stepped back and walked away, then turned again, almost against her will, and walked past him once more. He looked at her properly this time. Sorry, do I know you? Tessie stared. There was no one else around, just her. Just him, and he was talking to her. She wanted to cry. She wanted to scream. She wanted to grab his shoulders and say, Yes, yes, you can see me. But her feet carried her out of the store. She stood outside the mall, shaken. What just happened? She had spent months floating around the world. Like a shadow, people passed through her, like air. She had spoken to her mother 1,000 times, touched her brother's cheek, screamed into the wind and nothing. Not a blink, not a reaction. But now, someone saw her. Not just saw her, he spoke to her. She turned quickly. She had to know more. From the more transparent door, she saw him walk to the checkout. He paid for his things and walked out. She followed from a distance as he headed to the parking lot and unlocked a black Jeep. Tessie knew he wouldn't let her just ride along. She couldn't talk her way into anything. So she climbed onto the roof of the car. No one saw her. He didn't feel her. She lay flat against the top of the car as he got in, turned on the engine, and drove off. She stayed still as the wind rushed past her. The streetlights rolled by. And for the first time since her death, she felt like she was going somewhere and not just wandering. Before he pulled into his compound, Tessie climbed down. She stayed close to the short fence, watching as he stepped out of the car with his bag. He stretched a little, looked around like he had forgotten something, then went inside. She stared at the door after it closed. Who is he? She wondered. Why can he see me? And more importantly, what now? She stood there for a long time, trying to gather the courage to go closer. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, from fear, excitement, confusion. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring. But she knew one thing now. She wasn't alone anymore. Tessie didn't know how long she had been following him now. Days, maybe a week. She never came too close. She simply watched from afar. She learnt his name from when a neighbor called out his name one morning. Felix, a lawyer. Every weekday, he left home dressed in a shirt and tie, briefcase in hand, and returned before sunset, sometimes tired, sometimes talking on the phone. A normal man living a normal life, except for one impossible thing. He could see her. He hadn't said anything since that day in the mall. He hadn't looked at her again. But Tessie had seen him pause sometimes, like he felt her, like he knew she was still nearby. She didn't know what she wanted from him. She just knew she couldn't walk away. So, she stayed. She'd sit on the pavement opposite his compound, quiet, invisible to everyone else, just watching. Then one evening, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows. Felix's car pulled into the street, dust trailing behind. Tessie sat on the edge of the pavement, arms on her knees, head low. The car slowed, stopped, and the engine died. She looked up. Felix stepped out, shut the door, and looked directly at her. Then he started walking toward her. Tessie stood quickly, nerves shooting through her body. She felt fear, excitement, and something close to joy. He was coming. He had noticed her. Again. He stopped a few steps away. Why are you following me? He asked, voice calm but not kind. His eyes held no fear but curiosity. Tessie opened her mouth, but no words came. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her. She didn't even know if she could be heard again. I'm not trying to scare you, she said finally. I'm just. I needed to be sure. Sure of what? That you can see me. Felix frowned. I'm dead, she said quietly. I died months ago. You're the only one who's seen me since then. His face didn't change. No shock. Just a long, slow breath. It wasn't new to him. Felix had seen ghosts before. 10 years ago, when he was just 15, a car accident had taken both his parents. He was the only survivor, dragged out of the wreckage, heavily wounded. But the real damage didn't show until weeks later. He started seeing them, people who were no longer alive, not just glimpses or shadows, full faces, full body in their normal appearance when they were alive. Some begged him to visit their families or revenge their death. Others simply stared at him while he slept. His aunts who took him in thought it was grief, until he described people they hadn't even told him had died. It got worse. At school, on the road, in their home. He couldn't focus. He couldn't rest. His aunt, half afraid and half convinced, took him to a spiritual woman. The woman spoke little, but did a lot. She conducted bathing rituals. Dark oil rubbed into his eyes. For days, he couldn't see anything at all, and after 2 months, he stopped seeing dead people. For 10 full years, he lived without seeing the dead. Until Tessie. Felix stepped back from her like the past had just caught up with him. She was the first ghost he had seen in a decade, and he wanted no part of it. I can't help you, he said, not angrily, but with a kind of finality. He turned around, walked back to his car, and drove slowly into the compound. Tessie stood alone, eyes burning. She didn't know what hurt more, being ignored by the living or being rejected by the only one who could see her. After Felix told her to go away, Tessie didn't argue. She turned and walked, her feet dragging along the road like they had no strength left in them. But this time, the emptiness was heavier. Before she met Felix, she was invisible and alone. Now, she was still invisible, but rejected by the only person who had seen her in months. She couldn't blame him. Who would want anything to do with a ghost? Still, she found herself hovering around his world, near his compound, around the car park of his office. And though she didn't know it, Felix always saw her. He didn't acknowledge her, but he saw her across the road or in the reflection of his car window, sometimes standing beside a street pole, staring at nothing. Other times sitting on the curb, legs stretched out like someone waiting for a bus that would never come. He saw her sadness, and something about it followed him home every night. One evening, just as the sun was setting and the streets were glowing orange, Tessie sat slouched at the edge of an abandoned kiosk across from Felix's house. Her head was down, arms wrapped around her knees, looking more faded than ever. She didn't notice when he crossed the road. She only looked up when his voice said softly, "You can come with me." Tessie's eyes lifted. She was too stunned to speak. "I don't know what you want," he continued, "but if you need a place to stay, come." Tessie stood, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Come on," he said again. She followed. They got into his car. They didn't speak and the drive was quiet but not awkward. It was like the start of something they both didn't understand yet. At home, Felix placed his briefcase on the table and turned to her. So, he asked, "What do you want from me?" Tessie looked around, nervously shifting. "I don't know." That answer should have frustrated him, but somehow it didn't. He nodded like he understood. "Then stay." From that day on, she did. At first, their routine was simple. Felix would go to work, Tessie would wander the house. But slowly, she became part of his space. She greeted him every evening, talked while he cooked, stood beside him while he watched late night shows. Sometimes she would sit at the edge of his bed, legs swinging, asking about random things, such as cases at work, his favorite food, why he didn't have friends. He always said the same thing: "I like being alone." She laughed and told him, "Well, too late." Felix never complained again. Over time, he changed. He started smiling more, coming home earlier. Even his co-workers noticed. His assistant once asked him if he had started dating. He only chuckled. He didn't know what to call this. She was dead. But she was more alive than most people he'd ever met. They joked, argued over movies, laughed late into the night. Tessie, with her bright energy and constant talking, filled the space he had spent years keeping empty. And he didn't realize how used to her he had become until the night she vanished. It was a Wednesday. The house was quiet when Felix got home. "Tessie?" he called out, but there was no answer. He checked the kitchen, the living room, his bedroom, the balcony, but he didn't see her. He waited. Hours passed. He turned off the TV and sat in silence. Was she gone? Had she moved on? Was this what it meant when ghosts crossed over? The weight on his chest grew heavy. He hadn't even said goodbye. For the first time in years, Felix felt something close to panic. He paced the floor, hands in his hair, sat back down, stared at the door, hoping, wishing. And then she walked in, just like that. Through the wall, as always. Felix stood up slowly. Their eyes met. He didn't say anything. He just walked straight to her and pulled her into a hug. Tessie froze. It was the first time anyone had touched her since she died. His arms went right around her, but she was cold. Ice cold. Felix didn't pull back. She slowly wrapped her arms around him too. For a while, they didn't say a word. And in that quiet living room, one ghost and one man stood holding each other like the world had stopped. Because somehow, for them, it had. The night Tessie vanished, she wasn't trying to hurt Felix. She had simply gone home. She wanted to see her mother again, hear her brother's voice, walk through the places where her life had once felt whole. So she left the city and drifted quietly back to her old town. When she arrived, her family was doing better than she left them, and she was happy. And then she returned to Felix. Felix, on his part, had spent that entire day thinking. He sat alone in his room, staring at the wall, wondering if he'd made a mistake. He had seen many ghosts before. Years ago, they used to find him without warning, restless, silent, lost. They always disappeared one day. No goodbye, no warning, just gone. Tessie was different, but he feared she would vanish too. And when that happened, it would break him in a way he wasn't ready for. He thought maybe the ones in charge, whoever they were, had forgotten people like Tessie, left their gates half closed, and their souls wandering. He didn't know if it was heaven or something else, but he imagined someone somewhere had made a mistake. And now, this girl with a bright laugh and a cold touch was stuck between two worlds. He didn't want to get too attached. So he tried to step back. He came home late, ate alone, spoke less, laughed less. But it was useless, because before long, he being friendly with Tessie noticed. It hurt, but she didn't say anything. The week she had spent in his home had been the best since her death. He didn't treat her like a ghost. He talked to her like she mattered. Sometimes, she forgot she wasn't alive. One evening, they sat side by side on the couch, watching a comedy show. The sound of laughter filled the room, but only one of them was truly laughing. Felix chuckled softly at something on the screen. Then he noticed the silence beside him. He turned. Tessie was looking at him, but her face had changed. Her eyes were wide, her lips were trembling, and her skin was fading. No, Felix whispered. Tessie didn't speak. She just stared at him. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She understood. Her time had come. She lifted her hand and reached for his, but her fingers no longer held firm. Her outline flickered like smoke in the wind. Felix didn't move. He couldn't. He just watched, helpless, as the one person who had brought light into his quiet life was slowly slipping away. Her body shimmered, then faded. First her arms, then her face. She gave him one last look, one filled with gratitude, pain, and something else. Love. And then she was gone. The couch sank slightly where she had sat, but the air was still. The room was quiet. Felix remained there, staring at the empty space beside him. He put his hands on his face and wept. Not like a man, but like a child. Because somehow, somewhere along the line, he had fallen for the girl who didn't belong to this world. And now, she was gone. There were no footprints, no scents, no lingering sound, only silence. And the cold emptiness left behind by a ghost who had finally found her way home.